Hello, everyone, and welcome to Comms in Question. My name is Tracey Sobers, and I'm the Chief Operations Officer at Curious Public, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be hosting our first webinar. The first thing I would like to do, though, is to thank everybody who's tuning in today, whether it's from your homes or from your office. We had so many people register for this event. It was quite exciting. And, you could have chosen to be in any number of places today, but you chose to spend the next 45 minutes with us. And for that, we are very grateful. So thank you for that. Our theme today is engaging in a changing world. And we took the opportunity of International Women's Day to bring together a panel of leading women in communications to get their insights into some of the pressing challenges and opportunities in the year ahead. So let me begin by introducing these incredible women. First off, I'd like to introduce you to Anne-Marie Aikins. Anne-Marie is an award-winning public relations expert. She also specializes in media relations and issues management, crisis communications, and digital content. Now, many of you will probably know Anne-Marie from her 15 and more years in public service in Toronto. And most recently, she's been the face of Metrolinx as their chief spokesperson. Nice to see you, Anne-Marie.
Thank you, Tracey.
Dena Allen. She is also an award-winning communications leader with 20 years of experience in international development and human rights. She is currently the Vice President of Communications and Public Engagement at Plan International Canada. Welcome, Dena.
Thanks, great to be here.
And next we have Diana Chan. Diana works in communications and medical technology, but she has over 20 years of experience in sales, marketing, and strategic development. She is currently the Chief Marketing Officer at MOLLI Surgical, which is one of Canada's leading innovative companies that creates devices for cancer treatment. In fact, an interesting point here, MOLLI has created a surgical wand that has revolutionized breast cancer surgery. And that device was named by Time magazine as one of the best innovations of 2022. So congratulations on that, Diana. That's quite an accomplishment. I'm sure you're very proud of that.
Thank you very much.
And finally, last but not least, as they say, Kristen Gross. Kristen is a member of our Curious Public team, so I'm quite happy to have her here. She is a writer, communicator, and sales professional with over 15 years of experience, specializing in speech writing, editorial content and creation, and public relations material. She is our senior writer and consultant, and she is our firm's Western lead, and she joins us today from Vancouver. Welcome.
You.
So welcome to all of you. Very excited to get started. So why don't we just get into it? So
let's do it.
Let's do it. So as I said earlier today, we chose to do this on the day after International Women's Day. And of course, that day is a fantastic platform to showcase female leadership, as well as discuss gender inequities and human rights. Now, all of us here are storytellers. And when I think about gender inequities and human rights, it also makes me think about ethics in our storytelling, because our role is to amplify the stories of others. But there's a call in our industry for telling stories that are empowering versus not exploitative, particularly in the social impact space. So what I'm curious to know from each of you is, what do you think about ethical storytelling? And I'll begin with you, Dena, obviously because of the role that you have in Plan International. So how is Plan responding to the call for ethical storytelling?
Yeah, this is a huge topic in our industry right now. As you said, stories are powerful. Stories are how we make sense of the world. They're how we connect with people. They can also be currency. Like narratives drive decisions around policy, around funding, around who gets listened to and who is not heard. And I have to say that there's been this really, really positive move in the social impact space in the last number of years to ensure that our storytelling is more ethical. I think historically we've done ourselves and the communities that we work with quite a disservice in that we've been quite one-dimensional in the stories that we tell. We've been portraying people as victims. We've sometimes been painting communities or even whole continents as broken or riddled by poverty and disease. And this white savior narrative, it's done real damage to the communities that we work with, and it's entrenched these racial stereotypes. And so I think what's really important and what we're trying to move towards is ensuring that we're not telling stories on behalf of people. We're not telling stories for people. We're getting out of the way, and we're letting people tell their own stories. So really getting out of the way, making space for people to tell their own stories in their own words, in their own way. And we're also really trying to check our power, our privilege, and our bias. And that looks like being proactively, intentionally anti-colonial, anti-racist in the language that we use. But it also looks like bringing in different people with different lived experience into our editing process and stripping away that bias from the content we create. That takes more time, that takes more money. Like, it's not an easy thing to do. And I guess finally, I would just say one of the things that I'm most excited about that I see happening across the international development space and here at Plan is really re-looking at how we collect stories, how we develop content. There was a time, you know, when we would fly a foreign writer or a foreign photographer into a country, and they'd be there for 3-4 days and collect all this stuff and then come back. They knew nothing about the place. They knew nothing of the context of what was going on in those communities. And so I don't think that's right. And so we're really trying to ensure that we're working with local communities to produce these stories and this video and all of our photos, and really centering local voices and working with local storytellers. So those are just some of the things, you know, that we're really thinking about. It's an exciting time to be tackling that challenge.
That's very interesting. And I have to say, Dena, I have noticed the change in how Plan and other development organizations have tried to be more mindful of the fact that we need to let people tell their stories in their own way and not dictate how they do that. That also reminds me of another avenue, though, when we're talking about ethical storytelling, and that's, you know, finding safe or authentic ways for people to tell their stories. And I know, Anne-Marie, that you've told me in the past that we have to find safe ways for people to tell us their stories. But what does that mean to you in the context of ethical storytelling, finding safe places?
Well, it's a really fascinating topic, and I was fascinated by everything that Dena has said. And but I think I got into the storytelling from a personal point of view more than 30 years ago, and it was kind of accidental. It wasn't purposeful. I didn't go in and say, this is what I'm going to do, but I was raped in a small community that I grew up in. And I realized during my process of the police reports and all of that, just how little services were available for women. And I started to tell my story kind of openly, and realized that no one was telling these stories openly. And I saw the impact that had on people. They understood at a different level when they really heard from survivors, people that had experienced it, and they weren't hearing it from a police officer or from a medical professional about how to treat rape victims. So that's how it started. But what I learned over my time in the rape crisis movement was that other women, other survivors would also talk if you gave them permission to. But you had, in order to do that safely, you really had to do some prep work ahead of time with them about putting boundaries in place that they were comfortable with, so that they weren't telling, because what I did see was people would spontaneously tell stories like I did, and you'd walk away from them and not realize the chaos that would ensue in their own personal lives, and the impact that it had on people. And so I really learned that you had to do that in a very safe way and put up boundaries, develop boundaries that are personal to them. And the other thing is to check on them afterwards, because that's when the impact happens. And in today's world, with the social media world, what happens is they get harassed and abused and so forth. If, I think we've seen a lot of that with our female public figures that are
Right.
journalists or elected politicians. What happens after the fact is often extremely damaging. So
Absolutely.
I think you have to put safe boundaries in place.
That's an interesting point of view. And of course, Anne-Marie, we're all very grateful for you to share such a personal story with all of us, and quite admire that you are in a place where you're comfortable to share that with us. So thank you for trusting us with that story. The issue of safety, of course, and putting up the right boundaries, respecting the space that people need, it can mean different things to different people, of course. And I know, Diana, you're dealing with something where women are on a healthcare journey. And it means that you have to choose the words wisely to reflect those personal journeys. And so I was wondering, what are the strategies you use to do that? And particularly as you try to balance the communication needs of some of your strategic partners?
Absolutely. First of all, Anne-Marie, I applaud you very much. I'm very impacted by your story. So thank you for sharing. Yeah, so as you mentioned, so MOLLI is a device for breast cancer surgery. So our community and our audience is breast cancer patients. And joining MOLLI Surgical, I realized how much I had taken for granted about words and timing. When we deal with breast cancer patients, we use words like, bravo, she's battling breast cancer in her journey. And what I learned is that for some people, the word battle and battling is very hard for them to live up to. They feel like they need to be brave. They feel like they need to be positive all the time, when sometimes they're just so scared, they just want to curl up in a ball and cry. So what are the words that are going to honor the audience in our ethical storytelling? I also learned that timing matters. As most people are aware, October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. We see a lot of pink ribbons. We see a lot of rah-rah, go get breast cancer screening, get your breast cancer screening. Let's raise money, let's create awareness. But for many people living with breast cancer or have lived with breast cancer, that month is a month they just want to go away and hide, because it creates a lot of PTSD. And taking that for granted when we're doing our stories and our messaging is missing the boat. So for me and our team, it's trying to find the balance of how do we honor this community and at the same time use words and have timing that actually makes a difference for them. So that's some of the things that we think about.
That's good. We only have a couple of seconds left in this round, and I do want, Kristen, for you to have a quick word on that as well. I mean, you have to talk to so many different clients and so much information coming at you as you consider the best way to tell a story in the most meaningful way. Is there anything you would like to add in terms of what's the best way to approach that? And in just a few seconds, unfortunately.
Yes, even though I only have a few seconds, I also want to echo that the story that Anne-Marie shared, and that was really impactful for me, and what Diana had said also about the language that we use around a cancer journey, that touches me personally as well. That's certainly something that has been discussed in our house, not my personal health, but my late husband's. But all of that brings me back to, like, when I'm telling a story, and this relates to what Dena was saying as well. One of the early pieces of advice that I received as a writer from one of my mentors is that the universal is in the specifics. So there's a big difference between, like, for example, Anne-Marie saying, this was my experience, or the police officers that she mentioned, like, saying, this is a problem in our community. And using a specific story to tell a universal story somehow makes it that much more accessible to people. It makes it visceral instead of like intellectual, makes it real rather than theoretical, and clear rather than vague. So even rape or cancer, these are large pieces, but when we understand just one story, or with the communities that Dena works with, we understand one story that's so much more powerful in how we can connect a lot of people to that idea. But in ethical storytelling, like we've been saying, like it's really important that we do that in a way that's welcoming, that's accurate, that's empowering. Consent is really important. I love what Dena said. Like if we get out of the way and let people tell their own story, well, that's the best consent there is.
Yes.
And then respectful, of course. And I think that what Diana was saying and Anne-Marie about being respectful also means like following up with that person and saying like, you know, how did that feel for you afterwards? Yeah. Like that's part of, I think, the respect. So yeah, universals and the specifics, but the specifics are like really like ripe places to be doing communications work. So
yeah, and I love what you just said, Kristen, in terms of reminding us also to follow up with people, as Anne-Marie said as well, because I mean, people are handing us their stories and we need to take care of them as well and respect them and not treat them as commodities. And I think there's danger in doing what we do as our jobs and doing it all the time. We have to be careful not to turn things into rote, just something that we do every day, because we deal with in the world of people. So that was a great discussion, everyone. I enjoyed that. We went a little past some of our time, but it's well worth it, I think, because the world has changed in the way we have learned how to better respect each other and recognize that there are significant differences in how we all approach issues and how we feel about issues. And that kind of segues a little bit into the next question, which has a little bit about how we're all feeling today. We're in the business of imparting messages to people and asking people to pay attention to what we're saying. But there's an interesting thing that's happening nowadays. You know, in 2022, the Collins English Dictionary said that the word of the year was permacrisis. And I don't know if I really have to explain what that was, obviously. It's about the fact that there's this extended feeling of instability in the world, and whether it's the war in Ukraine, of course, COVID-19, the climate crisis, the looming recession, and I'm not even sure we can say looming anymore. I mean, on the news yesterday, we're talking about the grocery prices and how we're all going to manage that, as well as pay our other obligations. So there's a lot going on in the world that we have to be moving through. So in terms of understanding the audience's emotional landscape, what do we have to do to make sure we can cut through the noise and get our messages through? But also acknowledge that people are tired and overwhelmed and scared. And if I'm going to turn to you, Diana, on that first one, because I think in your company, you're dealing with people who are, dealing with healthcare challenges. And then on top of that, you had the pandemic. So how are you dealing with that? Or how did you manage that during COVID?
We actually launched our medical device during the pandemic. So connecting with the breast cancer community was a huge learning experience. And what I learned is you have a community of people during this pandemic that in some cases have gone through treatment, are going through treatment. So they're immunocompromised, more susceptible to infection. So even scarier to venture outside their house. Then you know that operations of hospitals were reduced. People were scared to go for their screenings, their annual mammogram, or else the screenings were reduced. They might have had a diagnosis of cancer and then thought that their surgery was delayed since it was elective. And so they're isolated. Everyone's isolated. They're nervous. They're scared. Your surgery's delayed. Your cancer is growing inside. And where you might have support groups and go to each other in person, everyone's in their own home. So what is the opportunity during this time to connect a community of people that needs tremendous emotional support and help? And so for us, we thought about it and we thought, okay, what are a couple of ideas or things that we can at least start when we're launching this company, in addition to providing our device? And so one of the first things we had done and still do is a show called Breast Practices. and it's hosted by an incredible patient advocate named Jennifer Douglas, who is launching a book soon. And what she does is she interviews physician and patient advocates, talks about their resources. It streams on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. So there's a resource to connect people and provide them resources virtually, let's say. The other thing that we did was launch a program called HOPE. It's an acronym for Help, Optimism, Positivity, and Empowerment. And it's a library of resources and education for patients and their caregivers. And it resides on our website. And so that's great and all. It's like a library, but we thought to ourselves, well, when you're diagnosed with cancer, you're like a deer in headlights, your family. Nobody's digesting any information, let alone going to a library for resources. So we thought to ourselves, well, how can we humanize it and make it better? So we put a librarian for our library and have a HOPE navigator who works on our MOLLI team, who is also a breast cancer survivor, so that people can call her and say, hey, can you help me? Can you give me some resources? And that's some of the ways we're connecting the community of people all over the world. And so we're definitely open to ideas. We're always listening because, of course, messaging and communications is about listening to our audience. So if anyone has anything they want to suggest, please feel free to put in the chat.
Yeah, that's great. And I think part of what you're saying, as you said, in terms of dealing with women who are in difficult, challenging times, is to making sure that we have the right level of empathy in our messaging so that we tailor things appropriately. But, you know, we can have empathy, but we also have something to say. So, and I'm going to put this one to you, Kristen. How do you find that what should we be doing to strike that balance between having empathetic communications, i.e. understanding what people are feeling at this time, but we have information we need to share? Might be a bad time, but we have to say what we need to say. So how do you strike that balance, and what do we need to do?
I really liked hearing from Dena about actually the tools that she has in creating community that I don't necessarily have the same reach as somebody who's got pen to paper. Like, my role is definitely I'm drafting the things. So what I try to do when I'm thinking about how I want a message to go, I always go to clear, concise equals kind. And it doesn't matter what you're trying to communicate. It can be bad news, but if it's coming in a clear and concise way that lets me know what I can do with that information, that to me is a kindness. And in this crazy world that we've just talked about, where, you know, we're balancing war and recession and you know, the pandemic is still sort of having its effects. I think there's so much more room for kindness. I just, if I may, like, I'm a bit of a nerd about brains and how interconnected they are with the various systems in our body. So, like, we're all walking around with these like fully alert nervous systems that are designed beautifully to keep us safe from things like lions jumping out of the bush. But now if you get like a stressful email or you hear a distressing story, like, physically we have the same reaction, but that system is related to your emotional system, is related to your immune system. Like, it's really if you start looking at it like globally in that sense, like, it's no wonder, like, anxiety is the most common mental illness in the world right now. And permacrisis, I think, is probably sitting there at the bottom of that that fact. So I don't know, like, so yeah, I'll just go back. I think my main message would just be like, the more clear, concise, and like helpful you can be in letting people know what to do, hopefully positively, I think that's more of what the world needs right now.
I agree. And I'm going to go over to you, Dena, as we just start to wrap up this round.
Because I want to build on Kristen's point. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so tell us your views on that, because I think about you and permacrisis. You're at Plan, you already have a number of ongoing programs, and then the next thing you're dealing with is an earthquake in Indonesia or a war in Ukraine. It's constant.
I mean, this is the world, right? Like, this is the world. There's already all kinds of underlying inequities that further, entrench unequal power relations around the world. And then you see this increase in climate change and the effects of that. You see the increase in conflict around the world and the effects of that. So, like, I get it. And in our world, in the social impact space, I think a lot of what you hear people talking about is this idea of donor fatigue,
Yes.
or this idea of compassion fatigue,
Mm-hmm.
and this idea that we can't take it anymore. Like, there's too many asks. We want to hide. I want to get under a blanket and just watch Netflix. And like, I get that. But I think what is also true is that that doesn't work in the long run. And that Canadians and people around the world, they deeply care. They care about these issues. And so they want and need, like, further to Kristen's point, clear action. They need clear actions that they can take to express that caring and to express that global citizenship that they have inside of them. And so I think as professional communicators, we're really uniquely positioned to help meet that need. And I think there's three main ways that we can do that, like, that we talk about inside at Plan International. And I mean, one of them, Kristen, you hit the nail on the head there too, in just saying humanize. Like, take those big, awful, hairy, horrible statistics around, like the global hunger crisis, and humanize it, put a human face on it, make it so that people can wrap their hands and their hearts around this big, big issue. And two, tell the good news. Like, where are the good news stories? Because they are out there. And we are making huge success in so many areas. Like, you look at child mortality, it's been literally halved in the last 30 years. That's amazing. That's an amazing statistic that we need to be talking more about. And I think finally, just being, again, clear and consistent in what are those pathways to action, and what is it that people can do specifically in order to fight against the perma crisis. And I think all of those things, they're really powerful antidotes to that feeling of heaviness or despondency that people can be feeling. Yeah.
Right. I probably ought to be moving on to the next question, but I want to continue on this theme a little bit. The person in my ear is going to be yelling at me, no, but as you said, Dena, there's a lot that people are dealing with, and it's important that we find those ways to humanize it. But at the same time as figuring out how to message to people, to our audiences, I think it's an interesting phenomenon now that internally within our organizations, we seem to be running from crisis to crisis. It used to be, when I started, maybe there was a crisis every couple of months. That means you had to hunker down and get everybody in a room. But now it feels almost daily. And be interested in your perspective on that, Anne-Marie, and how you deal with that in terms of capacity and team burnout. And your experience at Metrolinx, of course, in terms of the myriad of issues that you had to deal with every day. I imagine that this is something that you have an opinion on.
Well, I do. I think my opinion has come after all of my different public services that I have been involved with comms, and it's different today. These crisis communications was a thing you put into place a few times a year. And when you work in big public services, now it's one crisis after another and overlapping crises. Your staff will be on strike and you have a fatality that happens. And then it's just one thing after another. Then you have a cyber attack. And so it's, so there's a kind of couple of points I'll make quickly, because I know we have to move on. Was that one is that I think our communications now have to be trauma informed. So everything that we are recommending, for whether it's for a client or for our internal organizations, has to be trauma informed. And what I mean by that is that just like when you have trauma informed counseling, is that it comes from the point of view of whether it's the survivor, victim, the cancer survivor, all of the different people impacted by it, has to be based on what you understand of the trauma that they're going through. And that really puts them first. The other thing that I think is really important that you touched on it, Tracey, was that the helpers and the doers are traumatized as well. So I think trauma-informed communications takes that into effect as well, is the people that are doing the work are really traumatized. They've lived through all this stuff too. And the fact that they have to keep going into this crisis mode so frequently is taxing the workforces. So it's really important that we're going to have to recommend a lot of education, I think, for organizations, so they know what trauma-informed communications is, and they know how to be understanding the impact on the audience as well as the people delivering the news. And the other thing I think that is really, really important to me is that right now, because the pandemic had a lot to do with this, because of all the different mixed messages we got about wear a mask, don't wear a mask. Now it's time to wear a mask, and now it's and now we're going into lockdown. And the mixed messaging has made trust in institutions as well as in government at an all-time low. It's eked up a bit since my understanding of, I think, since we're starting to come out of the pandemic, but it's still really low. And so I think we have to acknowledge that. And I think the only way to handle that, because once you've lost trust, it's really hard to rebuild it. But you can do that by, if you have a principle in place with your communications that you start out with, that you tell the truth. Seems it's just as absolutely as simple as that. You don't hold back information, you over-inform, you just tell the truth. And once we will win back that trust, if that's a principle that the public, the listener can depend on, the audience can depend on, that this organization is going to tell us the truth and not tell us what they think we want to hear, or pieces of what we want to hear, or just not tell us things at all. So I think those are just my thoughts about that.
Well, I think those are very good thoughts. And I found that an interesting phrase that you used, to make sure our communications are trauma informed. I think that's sort of a new phrase to me. And I think that that reflects well on what we need to be considering in these very confusing times. Other things that complicate these times, of course, is doing our jobs in the world of shrinking budgets. And organizations are downsizing, marketing and communications budgets are being kind of stripped away. That's kind of a challenge. And I'm wondering, Dena, if you'd like to speak to this about how do you find that you're managing that within your organization? And does it also, having limited budgets, does it make your organization and any organization more vulnerable to not dealing with reputation management or crisis communications well?
It's an interesting question. I mean, so I work in the charitable sector. We are stewards of donor dollars, and we take that responsibility like to heart. We take that seriously. I know what it takes to write that $25 check, every month. And so we are very, very rigorous in terms of our strategic planning and in analyzing, monitoring, and evaluating our communications work. So we need to be able to advocate for every single one of those donor dollars. And I need to be able to draw a direct line between the work that my team does in communication and the impact that it has for children and girls around the world. Yeah. And so ensuring that we're delivering that impact to children and girls around the world, that's the core goal. And so again, I think what's really, really critical for us is ensuring that our communications efforts, they're always supporting the children. They're always supporting that strategic goal. That's our North Star. And then making sure that we're rigorously evaluating that, and we can really prove that we're having that impact. So I think those are the questions that we continue to ask ourselves. And I think that, again, just really speaks to the strategic impact of communications. You talk about these shrinking budgets and how it's hard inside a lot of organizations. But I think that as communicators, we need to be able to clearly articulate the value that we bring to an organization. And we need to be able to back that up with data. And if you can do that, there will always be a seat for you at that leadership table, but you need to be serious about that.
Yeah. And Kristen, as you think about this kind of an issue from the point of view of working for an agency, I mean, those kinds of budget cuts also affect what we do and what we're able to do. Do you think there are creative ways organizations like ours, like agencies, could manage shrinking budgets as we're trying to manage our own as well as serve our clients?
Yeah, I think the perspective I have working sort of outside of communication, outside of organizations in communications versus internally with an organization is it's kind of like two things. As budgets get cut, sometimes that creates opportunities for outside organizations like us, because we can come in and help with a project, and then we're on our way again, and everybody gets their needs met. But then sometimes budget cuts mean that there isn't as much work because nobody's spending money on outside contractors. And so, as always in the world of freelance, let's say, it's always a constant juggling act of keeping yourself busy. That's just life. But what I like about being in an agency, and what I think the value is that we have to offer, is we can go really deep on the skills and the services that we offer. Like we tend to be like really specialized, but that, again, two things that can also be a bit of a detriment, because what if we don't have a certain skill that a client needs? Are we going to lose that contract because we don't have I don't know, we don't have like a dedicated GR person or a dedicated graphic designer. So what I really enjoyed this new year and with Curious Public, not to make a plug, but seeing agencies.
Oh, that's allowed.
Seeing agencies like say, hey, like we're really skilled and we go deep in these skills, and you're very talented and go deep in these skills. Like, why don't we kind of know each other and be friends in this world? And then and that's what Curious Public has done. So now we do have, a consultant that can help us with EDI, and we do have that GR piece. And so I think in this changing world, that's a pretty interesting model where all of us get to be the experts in our area and help clients with whatever they need. Then again, it's like, again, two things. Being an expert in your realm now means something else too. Like a lot of the clients that we work with in education, they're constantly talking about the same theme, that like in this world, all of us need to be constantly learning. Like you're not finished when you do your undergrad. Like my undergrad degree, I think I saw a stat that said the shelf life of my undergrad degree is 15 years. And today, if you graduate yesterday, the shelf life of that degree is 4. So that's a very different world, and we all live in it.
And we need to be constantly changing and adapting and so on, which brings me to another topic then, Kristen, as you talk about being creative and adapting to what's new, the elephant in the room, ChatGPT. I mean, are we all going to be out of a job? I mean, it's definitely new. It sounds like it could be useful, but you look at academics and educators are already divided about its usefulness and so on. But is that an opportunity or a challenge for us? And I'll start with you, Anne-Marie, asking you if you think it's an opportunity and what do we need to be mindful of?
Yeah. Well, I look at it as like any other new tool and tactic and platform that becomes available. And Kristen, you're right that now, because I've been in communications a really, really long time, and it used to stay pretty static. You did the press release, you did you had your tools and tactics, and they kind of stayed the same. And then all of a sudden, things exploded.
It's like every year there's something new.
Oh, and I think it's more times a year something new comes up. And so there were things like, for example, TikTok was one that was going to, revolutionize all of our communications. And now, I deleted it off my phone the other day, not just because the Prime Minister said it. It wasn't really. It was one of those, I learned, just every comms professional has to learn every new tactic and tool and get familiar with it so you can recommend it or not and decide whether or not it's for that agency or the agency that you're recommending it for. But personally, I wasn't using it. So I'm like, what do I have it on my phone for? I did that for a whole bunch of apps that for some reason you download and then you never use them. So that was TikTok. So I think just like other tactics, AI is going to be one of those tactics that I think we have to give it a bit of time. We have to see how it's being used, because I think it's new, and it's what my understanding is that I've had some of my staff use it and tell me that you can get, you ask it to write a press release on such and such, it'll be about 80% accurate. I think that will get better over time. So I think there's one is you have to have your staff willingness to keep their minds open and to be exploring these new tactics and see how we can use them. They also have to wait a little bit to see how it gets perfected and used and so forth. But in the meantime, we can be preparing for AI overall generally by making sure that your information from your organization is at the top of search engines, because that's where AI is gathering all of its information. And if your website, your blog, your social media feeds, all of those things that are online, the accurate information, if it's not on top of search engines, then it's not going to grab that first. It's going to grab the less accurate information. So that's what I think you would focus on. I don't think we should be threatened by it, just like we weren't threatened. I remember thinking email was going to, that's how old I am, email was going to, remove jobs.
Yeah.
And all it did was create more meetings for us, things to look at. So, I think that's what, I think you have to, give it a bit of time, not be threatened by it, and see how we can use it to our advantage. Yeah. And that's just like any other tool.
But you do make a good point as well, because I too remember when email first came along, and it has, obviously it is something that we all use, but sometimes these new tools do a little bit in terms of not making us as efficient as we can be, don't they? I mean, we do have to be mindful of how we use them and accept some responsibility to use them wisely. And
a point I want to make too, Tracy, as well, is that I think the diversity of our hiring is key. Yeah. So because you can get, you can stretch your dollars much farther by hiring the right staff from the right communities and from that reflect the communities. So you aren't having to, it just makes your job much better. So the diversity in your hiring is really key.
Exactly. Well, I've been getting a cue that we're coming up to the time when we need to be wrapping up. So I'm going to throw out a question, and anybody can jump in just to conclude our little gathering. And that'll be a little bit about what do you think is our responsibility as communications professionals as we're engaging in the world today, going forward for this year? What's our responsibility? Anyone can take the floor.
I can start. I feel like our responsibility is to always keep our finger on the pulse with our audience. The stories we might tell this month, and the messages might not be the ones for 3 months later or 6 months, because of the events that have arisen, traumas that have happened. And so to be as close as possible to our audience, to honor the stories that we're telling them, to me, that's our responsibility. And anything we can do, and I'll put a plug in, to get expert advice, engage our community to make sure that our fingers on the pulse will be extremely important for us.
Okay, good. Dena, I think you had something to say on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I just look at the year ahead, and I think the thing that I'm most excited to bring into it and concentrate on is really sharing the stage. And so as professional communicators, again, like we are in this privileged position of we create stages, we create platforms for people to have their voices heard. And so if you have that privilege of that spotlight, bring other people with you. Yeah. Like amplify the voices that we might not be hearing from. And I think we're really uniquely positioned to do that. and to really bring forward some of these underrepresented voices and for them to make some space to speak up and call for change. So that's what gets me really excited for the year ahead.
Oh, that's marvelous. And I think I'll bring our little discussion to an end, and to follow on your theme, Dena, I'd like to thank the four of you for sharing this stage with me. You know, as I said, we hope this is the first of many webinars that we'll offer through Curious Public, and those of you tuning in, certainly let us know if you liked this format, and also what other kind of issues you'd like to have us discuss at the next one that we have going forward. But again, thank you to each one of you for joining me here today. Anne-Marie, Kristen, Dena, and Diana, thank you so much for the liveliness of the discussion. And once again, to the audience out there in the ether world, thank you for taking the time to be with us. As I said, let us know what you thought. And
Thanks so much. Everybody. It's been lovely. It's been great to meet you all. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye.